Criminal got
Hey,
a
hey,
million views.
hey, world.
Hey,
It is 8 o'clock in the East. It is 5 o'clock in the West. And this is FAFO. If you don't know what it means, look it up. This is a family show, Rick. Hey, everybody. I am Lincoln Project co-founder and your host for tonight, Reed Galen. Joining me, thankfully, God bless, is the one, the only, the Rick Wilson. Rick, welcome.
Reed, how are you, buddy?
Good. So, Rick, just during, as we're now in full-fledged campaign season, we like to take a half an hour a week and, help everybody understand that sometimes, yes, karma does find the worst people in the country.
Oh,
And so we're going to go through some of those people.
She is a magnificent visitor to the life of Steve Bannon today. She's a magnificent visitor to the life of Mitch McConnell the last, 2 months. And she's been knocking on Donald Trump's door, too.
Well, that's true. So let's start with Bloaty McBloatface, Rick.
Scabby.
So Steve Bannon, longtime Leninist provocateur, one-time senior aide to Donald Trump in the White House, campaign chairman for Donald Trump, in 2020 was indicted on federal, charges of embezzling money from a nonprofit. Fraud. Yeah, thank you. For setting up a nonprofit, Build This Wall, I think it was called. They took $25 million from people. He took $1 million of it and then spread a whole bunch else around. Not surprisingly, Trump pardoned him. I believe it might have even been on his last day in office.
It was the last pardon Trump did.
Right. So now the Manhattan District Attorney's Office has chosen to arraign him tomorrow, Thursday, as we're recording this, and he is planning to turn himself in. He said in his statement, among other things, that he'll continue to defend the country from immigrants, from drugs, from the likes of you and me, and he will die in the process, Rick, if he needs to do it.
I think the thing that's probably going to kill Steve is not a valiant defense of his fascist principles, but probably some guy in a cell block who gets pissed off that Bannon's smell won't go away, and even for prison, it's too much. But look, he is a guy, Reed, this is a guy who is absolutely one of the biggest posers in American politics. He wants to portray himself as this like revolutionary figure who's going to be out there. Guess what? At the end of the day, his lawyers are going to tell him to shut the fuck up. If he doesn't, he will go to jail. And if he does, he loses a lot of the mojo he thinks he's got. But it's important to understand, too, that figures like Bannon in the world that Trump has broken are now increasingly sort of believing that they are, in fact, above the law, that they will get pardoned, that somebody will take care of them, that there will be some miracle that will reduce the accountability they should have in the world. And it is good to see at least something coming out of Bragg's office in New York, where they are going after a Trump person. It is not as much evidence as I thought they had against Trump himself in the prior case that Bragg sort of punted on. But I'm glad they're doing it. I mean, look, there's nothing more repugnant in American politics than Steve Bannon. I mean, nothing.
So do you think, just thinking back, was it the month and a half ago now, Rick, when Alex Jones was on trial in Texas for his horrific behavior towards the Sandy Hook families?
Right.
He would spend all day acting like a freak in the courtroom and then would go on his TV show, lambast the process, lambast the judge, show these crazy images of the judge, like, on fire, discuss the trial where the judge had specifically told him not to do so.
Yep.
Do you think we'll see a similar kind of circus from Bannon?
We might. I mean, Bannon's going to have good lawyers around him, I would imagine. But, he's a guy who won't take good advice. I mean, you and I have both known people who cannot shut up, even when good common sense, logic and good legal advice says shut up. Everybody's known people like that in their lives. And I think, though, Bannon right now, he's also in a kind of a weird spot where his Chinese sugar daddy is out of the picture now. He is sort of not really getting the revenue he needs from Breitbart anymore. And so I think he needs to make a play where he looks like a martyr and where he looks like, so he can go out and do the massive fundraising and to go out and say, the deep state's trying to put me away because I fight for Trump.
Right. Well, I guess that was going to be my next question, because also, folks like our friends at Check My Ads are systematically going through online ad exchanges and making sure people like Bannon are getting deplatformed for their outrageous white nationalist, I don't even know what the other adjectives are, Rick, statements that are often inflammatory, often incite violence.
Sure.
But here's one where it seems to me, and this I think will run through both he and Trump, is that they are also completely willing to destroy the foundations of the system because it's not going to work for them and it's now working against them.
Yeah. And in Bannon's case, I mean, look, Bannon always looked at Trump as a useful idiot.
Mm-hmm.
He told plenty of people, it's out there in plenty of different reporting, that he thought that Trump was a buffoon and a character and a reality TV idiot. However, Bannon is also a hyper populist, so he believes that the mob, the mass, will be sufficient to overcome the traditions and norms and institutions and laws of the country to get him to the political promised land, which, as you pointed out correctly in the beginning of the show, he's a Leninist. He's an actual Leninist who believes that you must destroy everything to truly consolidate power.
Now, we're not talking about John Lennon. We're talking about
no, we are not. In fact, talking about John Lennon. You are correct. And when you look at Bannon's writings, when you look at Bannon's attempts to reshape the country in this nationalist, populist, authoritarian frame, honestly, they've been pretty successful. You have 70 million people who voted for Donald Trump and who are really okay with what happened in Lafayette Park, what happened with 1,000 other excesses. And right now you have these people who have Bannon is one of the main causative factors of building this media bubble around MAGAs, around the MAGA voter, where no one outside of that bubble is trusted in any capacity, where no one is believed in any way whatsoever. I mean, we've seen clip after clip in the last few weeks rather, of people saying, no, he declassified those records. No, they were never classified. No, he's allowed. No, he can do whatever he wants. And they can't look in the face of what's happening, in the real world. But there is a small benefit. The real world's going to keep proceeding on. And, pray the Justice Department doesn't lose their stones on this, because they need to continue to investigate and prosecute this case, no matter what happened with this Trump stooge special master today.
So let's switch gears from his bloatness to his orangeness. So you mentioned that this hack judge, Trump appointee, issued a ruling earlier this week that nearly every legal mind, including Bill Barr, right, whether you like him or not, went on Fox News and said this was a ridiculous ruling because Trump is now just playing for time, right? You lie, you play for time, you lie, you play for time, and it just goes on and on and on.
Look, it's worked for him, Reed, in the past.
Yeah, for 70-some years.
When he's fucking his contractors and getting sued for it, he just drags and drags and drags into litigation for years and years and years, and it kind of works for him. But
but the difference was that the contractor was either the biggest cement guy in New York and New Jersey, who, even if he had a lot of money, didn't have all the money, or a guy with a couple of trucks trying to do some work and, left those guys high and dry, not the people who literally own the printing presses.
Right. And the people who have a professional level of investigative power that he has never quite had to deal with at this point.
Right. And I think we should remember, Rick, just, going back on the FBI for a second before we talk a little bit, go deeper on Trump, is that remember that he fired Jim Comey, however you feel about Comey, and there's plenty of ways to feel about him, because Comey wouldn't make the Russia investigation go away.
And because
which, of course, led to a whole bunch of other things, right?
And he wouldn't go easy on Mike Flynn, which, I do think what we've seen, if any of you watching tonight are following Trump on Truth Social, I'm sorry, I laugh every time I say it. We actually
it might still be in business. It might still be in business as we're taping.
It might be. It might be. If you follow Trump's, complete meltdown on Truth Social the last 3 weeks, every day it seems like it gets hotter and crazier. Every day it seems like Trump gets a little closer to the edge of saying, Yeah, I took the documents. So what?
Right. You can't handle the truth.
You can't handle it. You need me on that wall. You need me on that putting green.
Right. I didn't pay for it. They didn't build it, but you need me over here. Maybe like Humpty Dumpty falling off a wall, maybe. But Rick, I mean, this is the kind of stuff that we've seen. I think that, going back to when the search of Mar-a-Lago first happened early last month to now, is that the Justice Department and the FBI have been willing to play this scenario blow for blow with Trump. They clearly, because to your point,
really
between the lawyers, the legal minds, Garland being a former federal judge, right? So he's very familiar with all these procedures, how all this stuff works.
Yep.
The FBI and the lawyers and the prosecutors, right? These are some of the best legal and investigative minds in the world, not just in the country, but in the world. So, and much like us, they have clearly diagnosed how he responds to different things.
I can tell you.
They said, okay, he's going to do this. Okay, if he does A, we do 1.
Yeah, and the first day that Garland walked out, and in 45 seconds, popped the bubble on the big buildup Trump had been doing since the moment of the raid. I think it was a very telling moment. He is a guy who is very reticent. He does not want to be out front on things. He doesn't want to put himself in front of the cameras. He doesn't believe that's the appropriate role for the attorney general.
Right.
But the DOJ has been playing tit for tat on this. As you said correctly, though, they're not responding to Trump's bullshit. They're saying, oh, we're not following this rabbit down the hole. Look at what really happened. And every time he screws with them, it has been an opportunity for them to reveal in their responses more and more and more about what he did. And look, folks, if you're a MAGA voter, if you're a Trump supporter, and you really think it's okay, for Donald Trump to leave super secret classified documents related to human intelligence or foreign nuclear weapons programs just laying around in a storeroom in a mid-tier country club, then we can't have a discussion. There's nothing to talk about. But the DOJ doesn't care about the distractions. I said this back in 2020 when Trump got COVID. And by the way, on our staff, Michelle Kinney has tested positive for COVID. Get well soon, Michelle. We know you'll be good.
Get well, Michelle.
We love you. Just take it easy. But when he got sick with COVID in 2020, I made a remark. I was on an interview somewhere, and I said, look, the virus doesn't care about Trump's Twitter feed. The virus doesn't watch Fox News. And this is sort of like the DOJ. It doesn't care about what he says on Truth Social. It doesn't care that he's on TV making up all these new legal theories about why he could have these documents. They don't care. They're rolling through the numbers, and they're rolling through the legal steps necessary. It will not be before the election, folks. Calm yourselves. You're not going to get an indictment before Election Day. But I do think you will get an indictment shortly thereafter, even with this special master silliness in the last couple of days.
Well, let me just say one thing. I have thankfully, knock on wood, never been a witness at a federal trial, Rick, but I have observed one.
Yes.
And let me tell you that when a federal prosecutor decides to go in on you, they know the right answer to every question they're going to ask you, and they're waiting for you to give the wrong one.
Yep.
And they waste no time and spare no expense to make sure
they are eager for the lie.
Right.
And this is, I think, one of the reasons that many attorneys right now are treating Trump like radioactive material. I think a lot of them understand that the moment the DOJ actually gets him in front of a grand jury where he can't vamp and perform and bullshit and say, magical theory X or Y, it's over. Because I've seen many of these old depositions of Donald Trump from these civil trials, and he gets behind closed doors doing the depositions, and he becomes a weak little old man. I don't remember. I don't know. I'm not in control of anything. That's not going to work this time.
It's sort of like Vincent the Chin Gigante in a bathrobe.
Right. Wandering around in a bathrobe in Manhattan, talking to his dead aunt, But he's not going to get that. You're exactly right, Reed. They know what they want. They know what the facts of the matter, on the ground are. And I think right now, Trump has got to be in a very short fuse on a lot of different things, which is why, as I've been telling people, I strongly believe that the moment he even senses an indictment is coming, he declares for president, because he believes, and he may be right, that will cause the DOJ to step back from the cliff.
Well, it would at least probably, again, as you and I are at best jailhouse lawyers, convince a federal judge that, maybe the proceedings should remain in abeyance. It should remain in abeyance until an election is decided. But let me ask you, Rick, about the materials that the Washington Post reported on that you mentioned, which was highly classified information related to a foreign nation's nuclear preparedness, all of the other stuff. We'd also heard previously that potentially there were the payroll records of human intelligence sources. I think they said at 21 there was a concern that a bunch of our networks were being rolled up. And maybe this is related to that. And so talk a little bit about, in your experience, because I know you worked at the Defense Department, not to divulge anything you might have seen, but how these sorts of materials are handled for the folks watching.
Sure, and I can say this: it's been a long time since I've had a clearance. However, the world doesn't change that much. And I still had a clearance when I was a contractor after that for quite a while. But it's been 16, 17 years now since I've worked with anything confidential like that. And I won't speak to any programs, even though a lot of them are very dated now and you see them on TV every day. But here's the thing. Top secret compartmentalized information is handled in a very specific way, even for the president, where that material, it literally says on the cover, this will cause irreparable damage to U.S. national security. You must handle this as if it were pure gold at all times. And so, if I was in my office at the Pentagon and I just threw a top secret file in my backpack and took it home, that's a felony. Even though I'm cleared to see it, you're not cleared to take it out of the building necessarily. And some of the things that we've been made aware of now is there were not just documents that were top secret and top secret SCI, but that were human compartmentalized intelligence program information, which could have told Trump, God forbid, or anyone else who had that document, not only the name of the individual that may have been providing us information from an overseas hostile government, but what we're paying them, how we communicate with them, who their case officer might be. These are things that are unbelievably crown jewels. And look, Moscow has managed a couple times in our lifetimes with Aldrich Ames and Robert Hansen to roll up people who trusted the United States with their lives to provide us with critical information inside the former Soviet Union and in Russia. And there have been a lot of American intelligence operatives apparently, and a lot of American sources who have been rolled up in the last year and a half, 2 years. I don't know if it's Trump, but it certainly would strike me if I was a counterintelligence person that if you've got an unsecured tranche of highly classified human source documents in Mar-a-Lago, you might want to look there, pretty soon.
Well, considering that he once ripped a satellite photo out of his presidential daily brief because he thought it was cool and tweeted it to the world, we should not be surprised that there was some malice aforethought on some of these things. But Rick, let's talk a little bit about Trump being in the middle of everything again, because whether or not it's Mar-a-Lago, whether or not it's going to Pennsylvania with Doug Mastriano and being kookier than he's ever been, and that's really saying something. I heard an NPR reporter earlier in the week say once again, it said surprisingly, Donald Trump has put himself in the middle of the election. Like,
who's
I don't know.
By that?
Well, that was what I was going to ask you. Who would be surprised by that?
Look, I know there are people, well-meaning people on both the left and the right that we both know, who last year, before 1/6, between the election and 1/6, they were saying, oh, come on, guys, it's going to be fine. He's just showing off. He's just being an asshole. Let it go. We're done now. Trump's in the rearview mirror. And then after 1/6, a lot of them were like, oh, shit. They can't just go into fantasy land. They can't just run away from it. They can't just imagine that it's all done now, because it's not done. And so as this year has moved on, even though there are a lot of wannabes, Ron DeSantis and Josh Hawley and Ted Cruz and all these other Republicans who think, oh man, when that cheeseburger takes out Trump, I'm going to be the one. Well, the cheeseburger hasn't taken Trump out. And right now, he looks at the battlefield and says three things. One, this will protect me from prosecution. Two, I still have 35% of the Republican base, do die or bust. They're never leaving me. That's a guaranteed ticket to the show. And three, Donald Trump recognizes that the American news media, even though Rupert wanted to punish him, even though Rupert was mad at him, what has Fox been since the Mar-a-Lago search? It has been back to deep state, or they're all after Trump, they hate Trump.
Right.
And the final thing that he sees, and he recognizes he's going to have enough Republicans out there in the world who will never believe that the results of 2024 are legitimate. Even if Joe Biden beats him by, 20 million votes, he will say, no, I won. And he knows there are enough people who will let his grift go on for another 5 years. And there are enough people who will actually think, well, this time we need to take guns to the Capitol. This time we need to take it all the way. And there are people that are primed to do that out there. And more of them on the Republican side are talking about using violence against their political enemies.
Right. And we've already seen it.
Sure.
So a couple of things, Rick, is that some of the stuff that we've seen with Trump, and I think we started to see this trend when Russia first invaded Ukraine, was that there does seem to be a little bit, not a lot, but a little bit of erosion amongst those Fox viewers who do accept that Joe Biden was the legitimately elected president, excuse me.
Yeah.
That, they don't, Russia's never been our friend, right? So the idea that you're sort of somehow extolling the virtues of Vladimir Putin. Fast forward to July, and you see the 1-6 committee do an excellent job really illustrating for everybody just what was going on and just how Donald was at the middle of it. And now you see the stuff with the secrets and the spies and the irresponsibility. And so, as we look forward a little bit to November, it doesn't take, you don't need all of those people, Rick. You only need 10, 15,000 in each target state to make a difference this fall.
As we've talked about for a long time with the Bannon line, and folks, when we looked at the Bannon line originally, we viewed it as from 3 to 8% of the Republican electorate. We can move those, as Steve Bannon famously once said, Trump can't win. We said, hold our beers. Or in the case of Reed and I, hold our Diet Cokes. But the Bannon line, I think, Reed, has expanded this year for three big reasons. One, the national security concerns you're just outlining, I think that's a deeply wired thing in Republican DNA, and it's harder and harder, even for the real ass kissers like Lindsey Graham, to come out and just excuse it. The only ones that can do it are like Marco Rubio, who just specializes in like the Lemmy-Winks effect on Trump. Like he goes right up his ass on anything to apologize or to pretend to be his best boy. So that national security stuff, even his defenders, they're in the tall grass for the most part on that.
Right.
Dobbs was a major shift. Look, folks, about 25% of Republican women are pro-choice. About 15% of Republican men are pro-choice. And that doesn't necessarily equate to the same pro-choice as Planned Parenthood, full-on, abortion advocacy.
Third trimester.
Right. But it does mean that they don't want government involved in their families. And I think the actions of people like Greg Abbott and Ron DeSantis and Tate Reeves and many others on the subject of abortion, no matter what you feel about it as a moral issue, the Republicans overshot politically on it, and it is having a very bad impact on their Senate candidates this year and on their down ballot candidates this year as well, because Democratic women are pissed off and they're coming out in droves. And a part of the Republican female base has expanded the Bannon line because of that decision.
So one last question on Trump and the field, as you mentioned it. Do you think that any of these guys, mostly guys, from Ron DeSantis, Cruz, Hawley, all the rat pack that you mentioned, these are people in their 40s.
Right.
Maybe at the outside they're early mid-50s.
Well, it's Cruz. Cruz is like 50, right?
Right. He's a little couple of years older than me. So do you think there's anybody giving them advice going, look, he's going to go again. And if you go at him, right, like you're done. You're cooked.
Well, I do know that one of Ron DeSantis's most important, in fact, his largest lobbying donor in the country told him after the FBI raid, you need to say that today that you're going to get out. You're not going to run for president. You're going to let Trump run. You're a young man. Back away. And there's been a rift between them because Ron DeSantis said, no. They are waiting. They're all in the wings waiting for Trump to either be arrested or for somehow the spell to break. And I have to say, Reed, I mean, you and I are pretty jaundiced guys about this, and our organization's pretty jaundiced about this. We've seen since 2015 over and over again, people go, well, X will win because he's a real conservative and Trump isn't.
Right.
Or X will win because Trump talked about grabbing pussy. Or X will win because Trump did this or that. It doesn't work, people. He has a grip over most of the Republican base. 35% means he wins he wins New Hampshire. He wins Iowa. He wins South Carolina out of the gate. Those people aren't going to vote for Ron DeSantis over Donald Trump. The idea that Diet Trump is going to work,
right,
well,
I think it's a bit of a stretch to call Ron DeSantis Diet Trump, don't you?
Yeah, I do think he's more like extra sugary Trump.
Right.
But look, and I also think, everybody's afraid of Ron DeSantis. You should be, because right now he has the Fox love all over him, and he's a guy who really is. He likes the authoritarian stuff. He thinks it's a winning strategy.
He knows how to use it.
And he's executed on it to the point where if he was in the White House, I would be scared. I do think, however, that Trump will beat him. And I also think that Ron DeSantis is a guy with a glass jaw. He's never been tested, and he's a weirdo. He's a weirdo.
Well, so let's you mentioned something, Rick, as we roll through our third and 3 and 3A here of the FAFO winners tonight. So Mitch McConnell and Rick Scott. So Mitch McConnell, everybody knows, the turtle himself, minority leader of the United States Senate. Rick Scott from Florida, longtime fraudster, got away with billions of dollars of Medicare fraud, made himself wealthy in the process. United States Senator from Florida, is the chairman of the National Republican Senatorial Committee. Guys, that is the organization solely responsible for protecting incumbent Republican senators and going out to find places where you can create new Republican senators. Rick Scott, at the beginning of the year, got himself sideways with McConnell by saying that he wanted to raise taxes on half the country and sunset or eventually get rid of Social Security and Medicare.
Raise taxes on Social Security and Medicare benefits and on veterans benefits. Good call, Scott.
Good call, Rick Scott. And then it was reported, as Rick Scott is sitting on a yacht in Italy, Rick, that the National Republican Senatorial Committee, the NRSC, has raised and spent $127 million and has roughly 20% of it left on hand as it approaches the last 9 weeks here of Election Day.
Reed, they spent $19 million on texting.
Right.
They spent $21 million somehow or another paying American Express bills. I would love to know what that shit's about.
Well, there's always this thing is like whose name is on the American Express card, because that's the person who's going.
Somebody's got enough miles to go to Pluto now. Okay, right. but here's the thing. I was told, I heard this from a lot of people, that unless you're spending all of your money on broadcast television, you're a grifter. Mm-hmm. Rick Scott has engaged in broad daylight in a massive public fraud, a massive ripoff. He hired a bunch of weird, skeezy Trump consultants to help him build up the Rick Scott email list. He was going to walk with that list, folks. He was going to spend tens and tens of, he still is. He was going to spend tens of millions or as much as he could grab on building up an email list because, and I know, folks, I know you find this hard to believe when you look at Rick Scott and you look at him and you think he's the progeny of an albino fruit bat and a milkmaid. This guy wants to be president, and he thinks he can be. He is a multi-gajillionaire. He's going to spend a lot of other people's money to build this list. He thinks he can go into the race and spend $250, $300 million of his own money and bump out everybody else and become president. He did that in Florida, but it is not going to scale nationally. If you think that Ron DeSantis is a weird guy, Rick Scott, the sing-songy voice and the strange wizardly hand gestures. If you see Rick Scott in person, you will hide your pets. He is terrifying.
And Rick, for a guy like him to go to Iowa, he'd be lucky if a farmer didn't pick him up and stick him in a cornfield with a straw hat on.
Right, and we got more of them aliens coming down for the cattle mutilations, Ma. It's Rick
or a scarecrow. I was going for scarecrow, but that'll do too. Yeah, he also has that very long, elongated alien neck, but I'll give you that. But let's switch back to Mitch. So Mitch now is, he's got his own pot of money, the Senate Leadership Fund, run by one of his closest aides, a couple of his closest aides. Yep. So now the senatorial committees, let's say $20 million over for an organization like that. $20 million over 9 weeks they're pikers at this point. Right. So now Mitch has got to go in and he's got to figure out not only where to spend the money, right, but who he's going to spend it on. Right. And so he's got all these people he never wanted. Right. And, he just pulled stakes in Arizona to leave Blake Masters to his fate. He's got to ship money into ship money into Florida. He's spending money in Colorado and Washington State and New Hampshire. Like Rick,
they're looking for a place to grab onto. And then they put out some ridiculous statement. They're like, we're going to put $168 million on TV. Oh, really? From where? From where exactly? Because you don't have that kind of money in the bank, and you ain't going to raise that money between now and election day. And now the TV is expensive. Now the TV is pricey.
Especially because remember, guys, that a candidate gets very cheap television rates. They get the lowest unit rate. Whatever the cheapest available cost of a television commercial is, that's what a candidate gets.
Right. If a TV station ran an ad, folks, during the year for $100 for whatever reason, that's what a candidate gets to get that ad for. They don't pay the same rate as an advertiser or as a super PAC.
But those same super PACs get charged so much that the sales guys in Dubuque go on vacation for the next 18 months because they just take everything they can out of super PAC as far as their rates are concerned.
Yep.
So what you're saying is the money doesn't go that far.
No, it really doesn't. And it's late in the season now. In TV, if you buy early, you will get a discount. If you buy early, you'll be buying at the price of that day and you can reserve it for whenever. I mean, except with a few exceptions like the Super Bowl and whatnot. Right. But they could not buy early. They did not buy early. And so McConnell is now stuck with this very hard equation where he's got to have his guy. He's only got one guy in the field right now that he loves, and that's Adam Laxalt in Nevada. And Laxalt is a Mitch guy 100% through and through. He loves Mitch McConnell. Mitch McConnell loves him. He's Mitch's guy from top to bottom. And I mean, look, if you're Donald Trump and you're going to think about going out there to endorse this guy, you are literally putting a Mitch McConnell wannabe and a Mitch McConnell fanboy. I know it's hard to think that they exist, but they do. It's to the point, folks, where Mitch McConnell's chief consultant, the most powerful man in Washington, you've never heard of him, but he's the most powerful man in DC. He has an amazing podcast that is making him millions of dollars every year. His name is Josh Holmes, and Josh is doing Adam Laxalt's work in Nevada. And so he's making a ton of money off this guy because Mitch cares about him so much. He sent his special boy, Josh Holmes, out there to do the work.
But I mean, Rick, isn't this, I was having a conversation with somebody yesterday, one of the guests when I was recording the podcast yesterday. McConnell famously loathes Trump, hasn't spoken to him and all that. Right. But let's be clear. If he's this much about saving the Senate and saving all of Trump's guys, he's a Trump guy, whether he wants to believe it or not.
Of course he is. Look, and these, the McConnell world came up with this theory, again, led by Josh Holmes, his master strategist, and who's like the most important consultant in the Republican Senate world.
The 51st senator in the Republican conference.
Yes, exactly. His theory was we're going to have a a governing coalition with the MAGAs. We'll control them. We'll keep them on a leash. We'll keep them in the basement. They'll vote for us when we need them, but McConnell runs everything else.
We'll humor them.
We'll
just humor them.
Yeah. Well, how's that? Right. We'll humor him. Come on, just let it go. He's just acting out. But you can't keep those people in the basement, and it proved out over and over again this year. That's why you got Dr. Oz instead of McCormick in Pennsylvania, who, by the way, I believe this in my heart. If McCormick was the nominee, this race would be upside down in his favor in Pennsylvania. Probably. He was a country club Republican, unthreatening. You got Herschel Walker instead of David Perdue in Georgia. You've got, Blake freaking Masters, who's the weirdest guy. I mean, Blake's, campaign keeps him busy.
He might make Rick Scott look normal.
Yeah, I mean, he really,
relatively speaking,
he really is a guy who took the I'm going to be an eccentric tween libertarian and just lives the lifestyle every day, just fully lives it. He is a guy. I guarantee you, there's a folder of anime on his computer labeled.
He rages at stop signs, Rick. He can't believe the oppression.
Right. The man is keeping him down, but and he's obsessed with pedophilia. He's obsessed with it, and so you've got all these strange, and J.D. Vance, who, look, Ohio's a very red state. J.D. Vance, if he was the generic candidate, if there had been a generic candidate like Jane Timken in Ohio,
they'd be up 6.
What's that?
They'd be up 6.
Right. Would not be talking about this. But instead, you have J.D. Vance, who thinks that women who are in abusive relationships should just stay there because we need to preserve the institution of marriage. Doesn't matter if there's a body count attached to it.
Well, also believes that women should be quote unquote freed, Rick, from the 90 hours a week in a cubicle, which I'm sure.
Yes, and his wife.
Several of the women very close to him, I'm sure, would find of great interest.
Isn't his wife at Goldman Sachs or something, or some investment firm?
She's not. She's a super lawyer, though. I don't remember the firm, but the point is,
that's Ted Cruz's wife at Goldman.
Right. Yes. Yes. But my point is that he speaks. He says all these things, but it must be hard for him to go home at night and get through dinner.
I mean, the snake eye this guy must get, and weirdly, J.D. Vance is running like an Invisible Man campaign.
I think that's right.
He's not around a lot. I mean, maybe he's in his house in San Francisco where he lives, but all this comes down to one big thing. Rick Scott wants to be president. He wanted to use the NRSC to leverage himself into a position to run for president, and he spent $150 million of donor money. And remember, folks, $19 million sending text messages to people that said things like, urgent, Trump will die unless you donate now. And it got to the point where even when read, this fundraising mechanism, again, with Josh Holmes at the helm, that does all the Republican fundraising, banned the Republican Senatorial Committee from using their platform to do these fraudulent text messages. And they spent money.
When they're the moral authority, Rick, you got problems.
Right. Yeah. I was just told over and over again that unless 100% of your money goes on TV, you're a grifter. And yet somehow they only spent, out of that $175 million, $21.9 million or so on television. 23.9 million, excuse me.
Since the beginning of the year, remember.
Right. And I find it baffling. The silence of many people who want to go through the books of every super PAC they don't like. They're suddenly very quiet about this. It's amazing.
Well, remember, Rick, at the end of the day, people need access. People want to go to Georgetown and go to parties.
Yep, and reporters want to hear. Reporters want to be able to pick up the phone and say to Josh Holmes, "Hey, tell me what McConnell's thinking."
Right. Well, Rick, we don't live there, and if we did, we probably wouldn't get invited anyway.
God bless. I moved out. I've never had a single urge to get back in that city. I mean, I like to visit. We do business there occasionally, but man, I'm always like, can I get out today? Can I leave by tonight?
Right. Exactly. Well, Rick, I want to thank you for joining me on the first of the FAFO specials for election season. Gang, we'll be doing these every week, so tune in to LPTV and our Twitter feed for more. Want to thank B and Emily for all the behind-the-scenes work,
Absolutely.
and I think we're going to leave you with a video that explains the difference between an authoritarian candidate and a pro-democracy candidate.
And folks,
Emily?
tweet us your suggestions for the next FAFO
Yes,
victims.
we're
for
always
next
up for
week.
candidates.
Do you know what they used to do to guys like that when they were in a place like this? They'd be carried out on a stretcher, folks. Like to punch him in the face, I'll tell you.
All right, God love you. Let him go. Look, everybody's entitled to be an idiot.